My Lords, I thank the Noble Lord, the Minister, for the introduction, the comprehensive introduction. I think we have to think about the context in which we are considering these statutory instruments, and I will contain my remarks to the first one of these about postal and proxy voting overall. And the context is that just this month the Electoral Commission, in its report on the May elections, noted that there had been a significant exclusion of people who wanted to vote from being able to vote by the process of the voter ID, and the Electoral Commission concluded that poorer people, people with disabilities, those from minoritised communities were significantly overrepresented among that group. In a general election, the Electoral Commission said hundreds of thousands of people could be excluded from exercising their vote in the next election. And I note that the Commission made urgent recommendations to allow for a wider list of documents for voter ID, as many members of your Lordship's House did as we were debating the Elections Bill, now Act, and allowing other voters to attest to the identity of a voter who's with them at the time. So I do have a question in the context of this to ask the Noble Lord the Minister to explain why the Department for Levelling Up, in its reflections on the election, failed to mention any of the Electoral Commission criticisms and described the rollout as very encouraging. So I think that's important in the context of these particular changes, because coming to the details of these changes, if we look at, first of all, at Section 3 here, we're looking at a time limit of 3 years on postal voting. And there's currently no limit. Now, I think it's possible to look at this two ways. One being that, of course, people being reminded that they have a postal vote, and I'm sure there's members of people in your Lordship's House who've knocked on people's doors and said, have you got a postal vote? And they go, oh, I think I'm not really sure. So obviously people being reminded of where they're at, being reminded to renew, is not a bad thing. However, I also think of many, often, not always, perhaps often, elderly voters who have a pattern. They know exactly what their involvement in election is, and they've been doing it for decades. And this is a disruption that could see them losing their right to vote if they're indeed unable to leave the house to go to a polling station on polling day and are just expecting their postal vote to turn up, and it doesn't, and the day before they ring the council and it's all too late. And so, in the context of that, a specific question regarding the operation of Sections 3. When local election returning officers, will they be able to use methods other than post? Because we all know that these days hardly anything actually arrives in the post except flyers and advertising leaflets, and people tend to sometimes just throw the whole lot in the bin. Will there be text messages? Will there be email messages? Will they be encouraged to indeed go and knock on doors if they have sufficient capacity? So what is envisaged about that 3-year reminder? Coming then to Section 6 about the limit of 4 on the number of proxy voters. Again, this is a little bit kind of each way, in that we imagine a situation where people, absolutely genuinely, a family have sat down, they've all agreed how they want that vote to be exercised as a proxy, and this could exclude people from exercising their vote. But I do also see the concerns here. So I think it's a matter of perhaps Section 6 is something to keep an eye on and see how many complaints come in and see what the situation is. And finally, because I don't get to do it very often, I will welcome the government's move to enable absent vote applications to be made online rather than the current paper process. This is an obvious small piece of improvement. Although my question will the paper process remain for people who are unable to navigate the online process, as is still in case indeed for many people? And I'd also welcome the digital identity checks for absent voter applications. Again, that seems to be a modernisation. But I think the Noble Lord the Minister, in the introduction to the SI, said we want a modern, accessible system. These are, in this SI, a couple of small steps forward, but we cannot forget the context where we are seeing hundreds of thousands of people who are going to be excluded from voting in the next general election unless the government changes the arrangements for voter ID.